Hi, everybody. Y'all having a good afternoon? Well, you know something, let's have a round of applause while we're here, just for the folks who put on the conference today. Round of applause for yourselves, obviously, but you know, this is one of these things where folks have tried to put together a conservative conference in Maryland over the years. A number of organizations have endeavored, and for a group of hardy souls, individual activists to come together to do this, I think it says a great deal about the level of commitment in Maryland. So it's a fantastic day. Anyway, my name is Andrew Langer. I am president of the Institute for Liberty. Thank you. As well as a contributor to Red Maryland and a broadcaster on the Red Maryland Radio Network. I want to welcome you all to the Energy and Environment panel. It's going to be a lot of fun this afternoon. I'm going to sort of introduce our guests in order in which they're going to be speaking and give a couple of introductory remarks, very, very brief. On the far right of our panel, to your far left, is Mark Newgent. Then we have Milloy from junkscience.com. And to my left and your right, Myron Ebell from the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Hey. So we all know as conservative and libertarian and free market limited government activists the important role that both energy and energy policy and environmental policy play in our society. The impact that it has on our daily lives, not just in the fact that so we can actually have access to energy, which seems to become every year an ever more important question in the state of Maryland, but also the role that the regulations that govern both the production of energy and the environment generally play in our society. In the U.S. nationally, we have a federal regulatory state that costs the American economy $2 trillion plus annually. That number is only going to be going up as this administration, both at the state and federal level, as they bring more environmental regulations online. I know our speakers are going to talk about that. So we felt that it was important to have this panel here today. I have the unique privilege of moderating this panel because I've worked with each of these gentlemen at various points during my career. So each one is going to talk for about 6, 5, 4 minutes, 7 minutes. What are you talking about? Anyway, they're going to speak for a couple of minutes, about 7 minutes apiece. And then we want to leave plenty of time for questions because I know you all have very good questions here. And so without further ado, I want to introduce our first panelist. My co-host on Monday nights at 8 p.m. on the Red Maryland Radio Network, Mark Newgent, who is an investigative journalist. Mark, why don't you just go ahead and take it away?
Thanks, thank you, Andrew. Thank you, everyone, for coming out today. I'm going to talk about these topics on a state-level basis because, as we all know, the General Assembly session has started for 2013, and the governor's top priority is his 2016 presidential primary. And as it pertains to energy policy and the environment, his top priority is getting his wind farms through. And one of the arguments that he's failed twice now, and I think he's trying hopefully third time is not the charm, but one of the things he talks about, an argument that he makes for the wind farms, is to say that we won't be able to meet our renewable portfolio standard goal if we don't get the wind farms. Now, what the renewable portfolio standard is a mandate on all utilities, state utilities, that 20% or 22% of their sales must come from renewable energy sources by the year 2020. Now, that mandate has been in place since the governor's his first legislative session ended in 2007. I just want to give you a quick stat here. In 2000 renewable energy in Maryland comprised 1.6% of all energy generated. Anyone want to hazard a guess of what it is in 2010, the latest year we have data? Anybody?
1.8.
1.3. So we're not even trending in the right direction even with the mandates. But, and I want to tell you how this mandate works because even with the wind farms, or without, they're never going to meet that goal.
Right.
The governor might think he's going to try to fool you into thinking he's meeting that goal, but it's not going to actually happen, as we've seen from this Energy Information Administration data. Companies that are take place, the utilities have to buy what's called a renewable energy credit. which means anyone generating renewable energy somewhere, anywhere, no matter what it is, can purchase that, and that's a credit they can sell to BG&E, Pepco, Delmarva, whoever. So let's say Steve has, let's say this candy is what he wants to buy for a renewable energy credit, and I have a renewable energy credit to sell him. He gives me this money, I pocket it, and I give him exactly nothing. That's what a renewable energy credit is. It's absolutely nothing. It's money being taken from the ratepayer and the taxpayer to enrich people that are getting in on the green energy business. And I want to give you an example of how this works. There's a restaurant up in Baltimore City called the Black Olive. Anybody, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but they recently got, let's see, I'm counting up the grants here, one for $87,000, another for $84,000, another $177,000 from DBED and the Department of Energy for this renewable solar thermal heating system they're going to put in their restaurant. Well, guess what? They're not doing it because it's a cheaper way to get their energy. They're selling the credits that they generate for their own energy back to BG&E and Delmarva for the renewable energy credits to satisfy this meaningless mandate. So guess what? You're going to pay passed on higher rates in your utility bills, and guess what? That's a loan and a grant from the government, or from the state government. You're also paying for in your taxes. So just this is the game that's going on. And another thing too, another shell game that's in this RPS standard is black liquor. Black liquor is not something that Andrew likes to drink on the weekends. It's
because it's not cited, Mark.
That's right, it's not cited. It's the byproduct of the wood pulping process. And what companies do is they take that, and to get a federal tax credit, and some companies, their whole business model is set around not about making paper or wood products, it's burning this black liquor with diesel fuel to get a very, very lucrative federal tax credit. Now, I know we all hate Obamacare here, but one of the good things about it, if you can call it that came out of Obamacare is that it ended that tax credit. But at the state level, companies were burning this black liquor and getting the renewable energy credit with it, so they're making money off that. And here's the thing, black liquor when mixed with diesel fuel emits much more carbon dioxide than regular coal-fired fuel. So yeah, this is what we're dealing with here in Maryland. It's this Potemkin village that the governor is creating to mask for his 2016 presidential run. And you heard he mentioned in the last panel about paid volunteers and sort of how, what you're up against. Here in Maryland, we have this advocacy funding group called the Town Creek Foundation based in Easton. They're the same people that funded the Maryland's Climate Action Commission plan, which is going to give us our lovely new global warming recommendations and regulations. Things like pay-as-you-drive insurance, cap and trade, higher energy costs, higher utility bills, all that stuff. They're the ones that paid for that funded the University of Maryland Environmental Law School Clinic's lawsuit against the Hudson Family Farm in Purdue. They're the ones that are funding Food and Water Watch, who's trying to stop fracking in Maryland. They're the people, when you get the knock on the door during campaign season from the hygienically challenged college kids with open-toed shoes and closed minds, those are the people that Town Creek Foundation pays for those people. So this is what we're up against, and the thing is, we have to arm ourselves with all this information. It's publicly available. You can come on. I write about this continually at Red Maryland, redmaryland.blogspot.com. You can come on, find this information, arm yourself with it. Talk to your delegates, talk to your state senators. Call it, write the Sun, write the Post. These are the things that you can do and arm yourself with this information. Because, we're up against some stiff competition, and the more you arm yourself with this information, the better off we're going to be. Because it's days like this, with this kind of passion, that we can take that passion and turn it into strategy and actions that can really force change in Annapolis. So, thank you.
So, about 12, 13 years ago, a progressive blogger from out in California started to write about how evil I was. And she was, yes. And she also was writing about a young activist named Steve Milloy at the time. And he and I never met each other, but to read this blog, you would thought we were working in hand in glove. Steve has done some exceptional work on environmental policy and climate change issues, exposing the myths of the left. He has his own organization, junkscience.org. Thank you, junkscience.org. Thank you, Myron. .com, junkscience.com. Is it junkscience.com? Junkscience.com. Without further ado, Steve Milloy.
Thank you. Is this on?
Yes.
So good afternoon, I'm Steve Milloy. I publish drugscience.com and have done so for the past 17 years. When I first got into this racket of the environment and science, I didn't know anything about the environment. I knew something about science, but nothing about the environment at all. I knew little about politics. But 22 years later, I can say that I'm not the one that doesn't know anything about science. It's the left that doesn't know anything about science. And they show it every day. Not only do they not know anything about science, they don't want to know anything about science. What they have figured out, and this is really sort of the genius part, they know that most people don't know anything about science, much less the environment. The environment is one of those things it's very complicated. It's got science and economics and politics, and they also know that folks on the right are too busy with their day jobs, keeping the country going, to pay any attention to this stuff. Meanwhile, the left, they work on this stuff full time. On the climate issue, for example, Myron and I, we probably represent, maybe somewhere between 20 to 40% of the full-time manpower on climate. There's really only a handful of us that work on climate issues. On the left, on the other hand, every one of them in every one of their organizations, which raise billions of dollars per year, that's their full-time job. And it's truly remarkable that Myron and I, a handful of other people have been able to hold these people off because their fondest dream is to saddle the country with some sort of climate legislation that enables them to have control of the economy. Okay? That is why you see, every environmental message from every environmentalist always goes back to climate, because climate is the best scam they've ever worked. They know that if they can get the country under some sort of energy rationing scheme that they control, they will control the entire economy, and it'll be game over for us. And the only thing that sort of interrupted them is President Obama. He is actually beating them to the punch. He's gonna ruin our economy before the environmentalists can get cap and trade conversation. But what I want to do today, for those of you that don't know me, I just want to introduce myself and let you know that while I don't spend much time working on Maryland-specific issues, I'm happy to do so. If anybody has any sort of science, junk science, environmental science-related questions, you can reach me at junkscience.com. Let me give you a couple things. The most important issue today is really climate. And it's really simple to diffuse alarmism about climate. All you have to do is just keep a couple things in mind. The basic theory is that increasing man-made emissions of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases are supposed to be accumulating in the atmosphere, trapping more heat, and turning the planet into an oven. Well, the reality is, over the last probably 17 years, we've added about 8%.
I'll hold it up. You can't see this, but this illustrates what Steve is saying.
We've added about 8%, man has added about 8% to atmospheric carbon dioxide levels. But where have global temperature levels gone? Gone nowhere. Now, if your hypothesis is that accumulating CO2 is turning the atmosphere into an oven, well, that's just not working enough for you. Okay, and that's pretty basic. I mean, that is a cause and effect. They can't explain it. What they do is, they'll come at you with, well, the ice caps are melting. The polar bears are going to be extinct. We're having more storms. This bad thing is happening. That bad thing is happening. Well, if they can't, prove the basics of their theory, which is that accumulating greenhouse gases cause some sort of measurable warming, then they have failed. Right now the environmentalists are going off on, 2012 was the warmest year in the continental United States, and God knows how long, much warmer than 2011. Well, so what? The United States is only a very small part of the world. In China, they're having record cold. And when you average it all together, global temperatures are going nowhere. And they really have nothing going for themselves. Now, what they want to do is use global warming as an excuse to advance various green energy policies, wind power, solar power, etc. But if you come to junkscience.com, I can show you with near mathematical certainty why, even if you assume that that CO2 is a problem, why there's nothing we can do about it. Okay? And you can take, I can show you once again with mathematical certainty that if you can shut down the United States, just shut down our economy, have no CO2 emissions, and you can shut it down today and keep it shut down for the next 87 years, the rest of the century, and you'll make precious little difference in terms of atmospheric carbon dioxide emissions. It just makes no difference. It makes even less sense for Maryland to do anything because the U.S. is a very small part of the globe. Maryland's even smaller, obviously. So, all these solutions are very expensive. We talked about tax credits. None of these green energy, they're not only are they going to have no environmental effect, all they're going to do is make energy more expensive, which is, of course, part of the green plan because they want to shut down the economy, they want to control it, and they're going to do it through global warming. Now, there are other environmentalist efforts, I guess in Maryland, Save the Bay. How many of you have Save the Bay plates? You should rip those off your car. You can't save the bay. There's no point getting the state of Maryland $20 to do it. There's nothing they can do. There's nothing anybody can do. What's going to happen today is going to happen today no matter what happens. If anything, today is probably cleaner now than it was 20 years ago, simply because we stopped water discharges to the bay, industrial point sources. The notion that Maryland chicken farms or whatever is a problem for the bay, not so. There is just so much storm water and other runoff going into the bay. There's nothing we can do about it, and save you $20. So I want to wrap up here, but once again, I'll make the offer. If there's anything I can do to help anybody, you can get me at junkscience.com, and I'm happy to help. Thanks.
Traditionally, for a very long time, long before the meetings such as this and the Tea Party movement, there were three activist pillars in the conservative movement back in the 90s. There was the pro-life movement, there was the anti-tax movement, and there was the property rights movement. And I had the fortune back in the mid-90s when I was working for a blind property rights lawyer, of meeting and getting to know and chewing up a lot of ground on property rights issues with Myron Ebell, then at, I believe, Frontiers of Freedom. And then I had the fortune of working with him at the Competitive Enterprise Institute, where he has the distinction. My favorite distinction of all time for Myron Ebell is when he was named a clean air villain by the Climate Trust. You hate clean air, Myron, and that's why we love you. So without further ado, Myron Ebell from the Competitive Enterprise.
Thank you, Andrew. It's great to be here with you all today, and I'm honored to be invited to speak and to be on this panel. I want to thank the Maryland Conservative Action Network. When Ann Corcoran called me up and said, "Can you speak?" and I said, "How many people will be there?" and she said, "Oh, we expect 200." And I said, "Well, you're going to be busing them in from out of state." But of course, I should mention that I listen to people talk about the zoning and land use controls in rural Maryland, and I sympathize with that. I come from the rural West, where most of the land is federally owned, so they don't have to even pretend to pay attention to you. They just do whatever they want. I should tell you, you think you've got it bad in rural Maryland. I live 5 miles inside the Beltway in Prince George's County, and then every day I go into downtown D.C. So these things are comparative. But I want to mention Ann Corcoran because I know you all know her, and she's one of the organizers of this event, and you know her as very capable, but you may not know that for a number of years she was one of the real leaders of the property rights movement in this country. Mm-hmm. And she did fantastic work. And how did she get into it? Well, she and her husband bought a farm out near Antietam, a national park unit, and they found out that the preservationists and the National Park Service don't really like private property. And so that's how she got involved. Now, I want to talk about the topic, energy myths versus realities. I think it probably is not a surprise to you that the myths are winning. And in particular, they're winning in states like Maryland. Mark mentioned the renewable portfolio standard. You have a rather low one here in Maryland. One of the reasons you have a low one is because you don't really have any prospects or potential for wind power. You don't have much wind. You don't have a whole lot of sun compared to the Arizona desert, so you can't do solar power. But that's really the good news, because every time a state builds more renewable power, they raise electric rates for consumers and manufacturers. So the fact that you're not going to be able to meet your renewable portfolio standard is good news. And that may be the only good news I have to tell you. So we've got these states that are competing. 29 states have renewable standards. California's is 33% by 2020. No, California. 2020, 33%. Now, of course, California already has among the most high-priced electricity in the country. So by switching over to renewables, they will not actually increase their rates that much. But they've already driven out virtually all the manufacturing in their country, in their state. They used to be a major manufacturer of a lot of things. They aren't anymore. They used to assemble 1.5 million automobiles a year in California, and they buy about 2 million a year. They now assemble a few hundred Fiskars, electric vehicles, and they import from other states and abroad all of the automobiles that they buy. So they have outsourced their manufacturing. And that's because one of the reasons is because their environmental controls are too strict and their electric rates are too high. Now, the next thing is access to energy. We have, with the Obama administration, a policy that is completely based on myths, and it is an anti-energy agenda that is designed to raise electric prices, gasoline prices, and anything else they can think of that uses energy. They want to make it more expensive. And President Obama believes that this creates jobs. Lisa Jackson, who's just resigned as EPA administrator, she actually testified before Congress that all the new regulations that EPA was putting forward would create jobs. And people on the Republican side sort of expressed some disbelief, and she said, no, all these companies will have to hire all these environmental compliance officers to comply with the new rules, and we'll have to hire a lot more regulators at the EPA. I mean, this is the level of intelligence that we're dealing with. I mean, you should be shocked, but you should also be really angry. Now, in this country, President Obama and his allies claim that we can replace conventional energy with clean green energy, renewables, solar power, wind power, ethanol, and so on. Well, the fact is we can't. First of all, it costs a lot more, and secondly, wind doesn't actually generate much electricity. The reason for building a wind farm is so you can build a new natural gas plant to back it up at least 3/4 of the time. Now, on the reality side, this country is blessed beyond all others in the world with coal, which is the cheapest form of energy. It's very dense and it's very inexpensive to mine. We have huge reserves, as we recently discovered, of natural gas in unconventional shale formations that have, through the cleverness of American private entrepreneurs and inventors, can now be exploited through horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing. And we have tremendous oil reserves. President Obama kept saying, well, we can't drill our way out of this because we use 20% of the world's oil and only have 3% of the world's reserves. Well, those are proven reserves. Most of the federal lands and offshore areas have never been explored. The National Petroleum Reserve on the north slope of Alaska has never been drilled to find out how much oil there is there. Off the coast of Southern California has never been drilled. So unless it's a proven reserve, it can't be counted in that percentage. We have 20%, we use 20% of the world's oil, but we probably have 10, 12, 14% of the world's oil. So we have the reality is we have huge reserves, and we can, if we can get rid of the kinds of people we have in Washington now, we can remain the world's major economic power, really on the basis not only of free markets and clever people working in free markets, but on the basis of our energy reserves. So with that, I'll stop. I'd just like to say one thing. I have a handout. I put it on most of the tables, on several, on the Cooler Heads Digest. I want to say that some of you may not have heard of the Competitive Enterprise Institute, or you may confuse us with the much larger American Enterprise Institute. I want to mention that because CEI was one of the lead groups that defeated cap and trade, and the American Enterprise Institute, which is a very large pro-business think tank, they are now promoting a carbon tax. So anyway, this handout has my contact information on it, and I look forward to hearing from you and talking to you, if not through email, at the cocktail party after the event today. Thank you.
Great. And I was going to pose a question while folks make their way to the microphones, but we already have our first question on the microphone, so I'm going to forego that privilege of the moderator. Go ahead.
Thank you.
I don't know if it's on, so yell it out.
Okay, thank you, Mark
Turn it
Nugent.
on. Turn it on. Wait.
Sorry.
A loud voice.
Marcelo, we need more juice.
Okay, cool. So I'll repeat your question, just give it to us.
Thank you, Mark Nugent, for mentioning what's coming up with in Maryland with the greenhouse gas bill. You briefly mentioned it. What happened with Plan Maryland with attack on land is about to happen with the attack on transportation and energy with the greenhouse gas reductions emissions bill and act. And I wish that do you know whether or not O'Malley has signed that? Because he was supposed to sign this plan in November.
You're talking specifically the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act. Well, they
Yes.
have to approve the regulation.
Plan.
The plan, okay. The plan is, there's a draft plan that has been submitted. The legislature this session actually has to sign off on it. They have to approve it. Because the way the law was written is that the commission came up with, this commission comes up with a plan. The MD has to go through several years of public comment and revision and then submit the final draft for approval. So that's going to happen this year. The regulations have been approved through the lower end, and now it's up to the General Assembly.
And I want people to know that the Maryland Department of Transportation has estimated that this plan will cost between $16 and $20 billion between now and 2020, and it's only a small portion of the plan.
And the problem with the plan is that they're trying to erase, economic reality through legislative fiat. In terms of, they just think that they can write a few abracadabra words in the legislation that, the laws of supply and demand will go away. Here's the thing, they wrote that the law cannot have a negative effect on manufacturing or jobs. The Department of Legislative Services' own analysis, and you can read the report, says it's gonna seriously and negatively affect jobs and economic output in the very sector that it's not supposed to touch. And they don't, and it's just, I still can't understand why these people, they pass this law and say, oh yeah, it's not going to harm anything. Somebody told me this, our environmental friends say, yeah, it's not going to harm anything, when it clearly will.
They lie.
That's true. I'm trying to give these people a benefit of the doubt. Maybe that's my problem. But here's the other thing. We had the Beacon Hill Institute, which is a free market think tank, wrote an analysis, an economic peer review of the Climate Action Commission's report. And they submitted it to the legislature, and the Beacon Hill Institute found that the climate action folks bought and paid for by the Town Creek Foundation, they said that they were confusing and conflating costs and benefits in the law, and they said this report has no benefit whatsoever to any legislator looking to make a decision. And he said it's absolutely meaningless. And it's the Beacon Hill Institute. You can go look it up. They completely, defang this report, and no one in the legislature bothered to look at it.
Okay, that's right. And I also want to point out that they justified doing this plan through Towson University's RESI Institute.
Yes.
And if you read that as an economic analysis, it is unbelievable.
And
If
then
anybody has their kids at Towson and that organization, pull them out.
You
Okay.
can look up Towson's 990 IRS forms, and I guarantee you you'll find, or look up the Town Creek Foundation, I guarantee you they funded the study as well.
Next question.
I have a simple suggestion, and you can have a pleasant vacation following it. If you're interested in global warming, take a ride up through the state of Montana, cross over the border into Canada, and go to 2 Canadian national parks. One's called Banff, and the other one's called Jasper. And in those parks, they have various ice glaciers and ice fields, and they have plots of how the size of these glaciers, and you can walk out on the glacier, have diminished over the last 20, 50, 100 years. Now, maybe they're lying with their signs, but I would just suggest you take that vacation and you enjoy the scene.
It's very useful to know that in the recession of many of these glaciers and ice fields, we're discovering things that were covered up in previous centuries. So in previous centuries, those glaciers must have been smaller than they are today for things like trees to be growing there. So there must have been a warmer period before people had SUVs and were burning coal, oil, and natural gas, when those glaciers were smaller than they are today. So I don't take your point.
And that was actually going to be one of my questions to you guys. Climate changes. No one denies that climate changes. It's number one, the question of the role of mankind in that change, and then whether or not there's anything that we do to, in turn, destroys our economy and destroys, frankly, destroying our economy, our ability to fight other real environmental problems that are out there that goes with that destruction. Whether or not we want to do that. Anyway, next question.
Yeah, a simple question to Mr. Milloy. It's a science question. I never hear anyone talking about nuclear power anymore, which seems to be a solution. The emissions problem is over. The generation of electricity domestically without keeping the money going overseas is solved. No one ever talks about it.
Well, the good news with nuclear is that once a plant is up and running, it's actually the cheapest form of electricity to produce. The bad news is that it's the most expensive form of power to build just because the environmentalists get in the way. I mean, they hate nuclear power is one of their bed wars, and they're going to do whatever they can to stop it. Places like France, mostly nuclear, Japan, they got a lot of nuclear. It works. And have we been developing nuclear plants over the last 40, 50 years? We probably have even better plants than they have. But we haven't. And of course, last year's disaster in Fukushima, that didn't help the nuclear industry at all. And that was really just a screw up. All they had to do was keep the generators, they could put them on concrete blocks, 10 feet higher. They wouldn't have been a problem at all. But of course, I guess no one thought of that. The utility industry in America has been, there are some companies that want to build nuclear plants, and there's been legislation in Congress. There's like $18 billion in loan guarantees out there that companies are applying for. Some of them have been awarded, but none of it can be finalized because the Obama administration doesn't really want nuclear power, and so the contract negotiations with, say, Southern Company are breaking down. So I don't really think we're going to see nuclear power in this country simply because the utilities aren't really going to fight for it, and there aren't enough pro-nuclear activists out there to, we're going to find lots of liberals who want to lay down in front of bulldozers ultimately, and few conservatives want to run over them.
So as our next speaker coming, I was going to save this until the end, but a lot of you don't know that today is Cheryl Jaros's 35th birthday. Please, everybody, wish her a happy birthday. All she wanted to do for her birthday was spend it among fellow conservatives. So.
Thank you,
You're welcome.
I have a question for Mr. Ebell.
Ebell.
Speak up, please.
Yes, that question.
Over Christmas holiday, I had the pleasure of visiting family up in Glencoe, Pennsylvania, which is way above the Cumberland Gap and the mountains. They have,
Speak up.
we counted,
Yes, Cheryl, step closer to the microphone. so
as
you
we
can hear
went closer to
There you go.
Glencoe, Pennsylvania, we counted 28 windmills up lining the top of the mountain. They weren't spinning. They were very ugly. The family that I visited informed me that the taxpayers are helping fund these windmills, which cost $3 million apiece. But the energy that they do collect, they send to Ohio. Now, we don't have a lot of these windmills in Maryland, but the ones that we do, I don't know if Maryland families are getting the benefit of those windmills, but my question, is there any legislation out there that helps these families in Pennsylvania, up in the mountains, that are paying for these windmills, anything out there that would help them recoup some of the benefit from these windmills?
Well, there really are no benefits. The reason some rural landowners like windmills is because if they put a wind farm on your property, you get paid. And you get paid quite a lot. And in Britain, you'll see that some of the, for instance, David Cameron, the Prime Minister, is a big supporter of wind. Well, his father-in-law, who's in the nobility, Lord, I forget his last name, he owns a lot of wind farms on his property. And he doesn't own them, he gets the rent. And he gets several million pounds per year for the price of these. The problem with wind is they don't, on average in good areas, they only run 25% of the time. And that, okay, but the problem is, most of our electricity use in most of the country is in the summer months because of air conditioning. And air conditioning keeps going further north every year because people like being pleasant, having pleasant temperatures in the summer. So more and more people in places like Michigan have air conditioning. But in Texas, you can't live, or Arizona, with that air conditioning. Well, the wind doesn't blow in the summer. And so the windmills that in Texas that run at 23% of rated capacity in North Texas run at 2% of rated capacity in the summer months when the electricity is actually valuable. So I haven't answered all your question, but I think that's a key point to always keep in mind. The power produced by wind is intermittent, but it typically comes at a time when you least need the power, when it's the least valuable.
But they get paid for it anyway, that's right.
Okay, it's really no secret to some of us who are watching these things that part of the goal between the climate change people, aside from the economic control, is also population control. They are anti-life. And if we're going to address the threat of climate control, that element must be brought in there as well. In fact, it probably, morally speaking, overrides the financial aspects. How are we going to go about approaching that and factoring in that overriding concern?
Well, I think the grand irony, we need to be more vociferous about pointing out the grand irony in most of these environmental policies, is that as they talk about policies that are supposed to protect life, health and safety, what they're doing at the other end is blaming mankind, and undergirding all this, as you point out, is this idea that mankind is a scourge on the environment. And we need to be pointing out how this is essentially a contradiction. I'm sure you'd agree with that.
I think you're right. The more radical environmentalists who are not as politically savvy are quite open about the fact that population is the ultimate issue. I think one of the things that you need to argue when you argue with your friends here in Maryland who believe in global warming and we have to do something about it, is that the biggest threat to poor people in the world is energy poverty. The World Bank, the EIA, the IEA, the International Energy Agency, we have an EIA here, the Energy Information Administration. The IEA just said that 1.3 billion people in the world don't have access to electricity. Now, that's an underestimate because they don't count people who just have a light bulb or just have a hot plate or just have, or only have, or have intermittent electricity like in India or Kenya or somewhere. But 1.3 billion people don't even have electricity. We're talking about raising the price of producing electricity by getting rid of coal. And what are people in India going to do? I mean, there's 500 million people there who don't have electricity. Think about that. Think about what life is like without electricity. You can't enjoy any of the benefits of modern industrial civilization if you don't have electricity.
I I think it's the old saying, they say wealthier is healthier, well,
That's
wealthier
right.
is cleaner.
Very, very true. We have time for one more question, and then our speakers will be available afterwards. But please, wrap us up.
Is it still true that the Earth's climate is completely dependent on the sun? And that relationship? Because
The question is it true? Is it still true that the Earth's climate is completely dependent upon the sun? Which gets to a question that, I was going to say, climate change, isn't it just important that climate changes, which is what we were talking about earlier?
Because last time I checked, other planets are having similar issues that we're having. So if there are people on other planets, how are we contributing to the problem that other planets are having? I don't see that.
Look, in a climate debate, facts just don't matter. For the last 17 years, we've dumped all this, all this greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. There's been no warming, but you're not going to see that mentioned by any alarmists because it's one of those inconvenient metrics.
No, I think that sums up. Myron, do you have anything you want to add to that, or Mark? No? Well, listen, thank you all for coming out. I think our speakers.